Thanks everybody for being here of a joint meeting between the City Commission and the Fargo Planning Commission. Again, just a little logistic issues, but you have to turn your mic on. If it's green, they can hear you. If you're going to eat chips, please put it back on red so that we can preserve the audio quality. Appreciate that. So we're here today to talk about the Regional Housing Needs and Analysis study that was done through MetroCog as a metro-wide group. Erin is joining us again, and appreciate having her back in Fargo. I think this study that MetroCog did with you has really been a good catalyst for a lot of our discussions with planning, I know at the City Commission level, but also just incorporating all our neighboring communities, knowing that our housing market expands just beyond our city boundaries. But we really look forward to, as a planning commission, getting this specific update as well and figuring out how we can, what piece of the pie that we can play in future actions. I don't know if anybody other has opening comments or if you'd like to turn it over for the presentation. But if not, Nicole and Erin.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Just for the public and everybody else watching, we have a part 2 of this event. So we'll have this session here. Erin with HRNA will have about 20 minutes of presentation of just kind of some basic data. We do have handouts for the executive portion of the study. It's a thick study, and kind of the goals of the study was basically to really get everybody in the metro region using the same data. As you can imagine, between census and real estate data and all the different tools out there, and over what spectrum of time, whether we're talking about in the 10-year segment or a 5-year segment or a 20-year segment, when you talk about like percentages, like 20% or things like that, we're always trying to get to the fundamental basics of what are we trying to talk about. And I think what got us on this question was when the diversion was first being planned, we would hear, oh my goodness, 10,000 jobs are going to be needed by the year X date, and where are they going to all live? And, you'd see that, maybe as a headline. And we say, okay, wait a minute, let's figure out what we're actually talking about and over what period of time, et cetera. So we did a kind of first ever metro-wide study, if you will, thanks to MetroCog for hosting the study. And myself and my counterparts in other cities were the technical advisors along with housing experts. Many of them are in this room today. And that was really the baseline. From there, each jurisdiction went on to it's going to go on to another study or another need. Ours is the growth plan. And so some of the intricacies of this, where we're at today, is talking about the study as a metro-wide level, but then also talking about the study as a Fargo, specific to our jurisdiction. And so we were, trying to do this in September. Thanks for everybody's patience and as we reschedule. So this is the September redo, if you will. And we're very glad to have the Planning Commission and City Commission together here for this work session. Erin's going to present for about 20 minutes and then join us at the table. Adam and I will talk for a few minutes about what's next. But really, we want to get into the implementation discussion for maybe about 15 minutes or so. And there's another session after this over at Sky Commons before our planning commission. So our planning commissioners are with us for a bit of a duration. And we've got our HUD partners, our affordable housing partners with us to get into more technical discussion since we have Erin with us. And everybody's invited to that if they want to participate in that work session. Yeah, Rocky.
Thanks, Nicole. And I apologize, maybe to help Erin know who she's talking to, we should probably do a round of introductions, and I forgot about that.
So I'll toss it over to Erin.
I'm Rocky Schneider, Chair of the Planning Commission.
Mayor Tim Mahoney.
I just took a bite. Denise Kolpak, City Commission.
Dave Pepcorn, City Commission.
Brett Shuey, Planning Commission.
John Strand, City Commission.
Adam Alterberg, Fargo-Moorhead Metropolitan Council of Governments.
Jennifer Holtz, Fargo Planning Commission.
Tommy Schmidt, Planning Commission.
Art Rosenberg, Planning Commission.
Miranda Tassa, Planning Commission.
Arlette Preston, Fargo City Commission.
Nancy Morris, City Attorney.
Mark Williams, City of Fargo Planning.
Nicole Crutchfield, Planning Director.
Michael Rethinger, City Administrator.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for those intros. I was about to ask the same question, so thank you. And Nicole gave a really great overview of sort of where we're headed for the next hour. I'm Erin Lonoff. I'm a principal with HR&A Advisors. We are a real estate and economic development consulting firm. I'm based in Minneapolis. Thank you for letting me reschedule. I had a flat tire in September that made us have to reschedule today. So I'm going to walk through sort of an overview of the major findings from our regional housing study. And we're going to talk a bit today about what does this mean then for the city of Fargo? What can you all be doing as a city to meet housing needs at this level? But it all starts really at this regional scale, that housing demand and housing supply is really a regional issue and really affects the regional economy. So let's dive into the data. As Nicole said, the purpose of this is really to start with a grounding for the region around what are the major housing issues facing Cass and Clay counties, and how can you all start to think about sort of the regional picture of the housing needs and potentially solutions to those challenges as a region. In terms of the big picture findings from our study, what we found is first and foremost, the Fargo region, Fargo-Moorhead region, has had significant and very strong employment growth. And that is the primary driver of housing need in this region. At the same time of this very strong and significant employment growth, housing supply and deliveries of housing has not kept up with that job growth and that population growth. So that's creating a tension point in the housing need that you have in your region. There's an opportunity and a need for increased homeowner access, which I'll talk about in a moment, and there's a lack of sufficient affordable rental housing, which we'll dive into the data and sort of the nuance of in a moment. In terms of the strong employment growth, over the last 10 years, your region has added nearly 23,000 jobs, and you continue to have a very, very low unemployment rate. And as Nicole said, new regional initiatives like the diversion construction is going to intensify these trends. And the other thing that is really important to note around this employment growth is that the jobs that are being added to your region are very high-paying jobs in these high-growth industries. So the median or the average salary, for these new jobs that are being added to your region average $70,000 a year, which is higher than your area's median income of $66,000. At the same time of all of this job growth, we're not seeing the same amount of housing production sort of keeping pace with that job growth. And one of the indicators that we see and we look at for this is the ratio of jobs to housing units. And what we saw is that you all have a ratio of 1.5 jobs to housing units when compared to the national average of 1.3. We also saw trends around the development of 2 to 9 unit buildings not keeping pace with with the increase in single family development, as well as sort of large multifamily development that's been coming into the region. So let's dive into sort of some of the data behind these things. Within the city of Fargo itself, we see that 50% of the region's new housing development has taken place in the city of Fargo over the last 10 years. And your city also drew in the bulk of these new employment hubs that have grown in this region. This should come as no surprise to you all sitting here in Fargo that Fargo is one of the center hubs for this region. And so it's not surprising that you're going to see a significant piece of both economic development growth and housing growth in your city. But I don't want to discount that as a given. I also want to sort of commend you all for helping to make this happen. You've helped to make the development that you've seen in the last 10 years happen. However, there's still a need for affordable rental and entry-level home ownership typologies, both within the city of Fargo and the broader region. So let's dive into some of that data. So in terms of the growth that the Fargo-Moorhead region has seen, you have some of the highest population growth and faster job growth. And when you compare that to some other major cities in your sort of broader upper Midwest region, the growth is really astronomical. So faster than the Twin Cities and faster than Rochester, Minnesota, which has been growing incredibly fast these days. And now getting back to this point around, so you have very strong employment growth, you have very strong population growth, but your housing development has not been keeping pace with this. And so this really sort of gets at that gap between the national average of jobs to housing units versus what you see in the in the region of that 1.5 jobs to housing units. In terms of where development is taking place, so this map here shows, the median year of the housing unit that was built. And so what this shows you is that the vast majority of development, new development, has been taking place in Southwest Fargo, and then within the region in the Southwest areas in West Fargo and in Horace. And that's where we're seeing a significant amount of development sort of when you look at sort of the regional perspective. In terms of sort of the needs and the opportunities for the region, we identified a few sort of areas for focus, and we'll dive into the data behind these pieces. But in general, we've seen a significant amount of housing cost appreciation, even before the pandemic. In 2022, the minimum income required to purchase the average home in this region was $81,000. When you take that income, less than 20% of renters in your region could afford to purchase a median-priced home. Mortgage denial rates are higher for non-white households, even when controlling for income. And 64% of senior renter households and 58% of single-parent renter households are cost-burdened, and we'll dive into that data in a second. Finally, there's a lack of sufficient affordable rental housing in the region. And the largest share of households that are cost burdened in your region and which are the most vulnerable are those families that are earning less than $35,000 a year. As we look at these trends, starting with home ownership rates, the Fargo-Moorhead region tends to have a lower rate than the national average for home ownership, and that home ownership rate has slightly declined over the last 10 years. Interestingly, during our study, we conducted a survey of community members on a whole range of sort of housing issues and housing needs. And one of the striking things that we learned during that survey was that 90% of your renters in the region want to be homeowners, but a lack of savings for a down payment and the low supply of affordable homes is what is keeping them or preventing them from becoming homeowners. So said differently, I think there's a lot of perception that renters want to stay renters. Our survey found that, in fact, that is not the case, that maybe only 10% of your renters in the community actually want to remain renters. And maybe sort of just highlighting this in one more way, it shows that you have a very committed sort of residential population. They want to put down roots here. They want to sort of get access to wealth building opportunities through home ownership. As we look at mortgage denial rates, we found that for non-white households in the region, mortgage denial rates were higher than white households when controlling for income. So what you see is that Hispanic or Latino and Black and Asian households are much more likely to be denied access to mortgages. And this is when we control for income. So two households with the same income, but they vary by race, you are more likely to be denied if you are non-white. When we look at cost burden for renter households, nearly all households earning less than $20,000 a year are cost burdened. Nearly 70% of households earning between $20,000 and $35,000 a year are cost burdened. Most of the new multifamily units that are being developed right now are really targeting your region's sort of new high income earners, which is really has helped to, it does not address the need for affordable housing at those very low income bands. Our study also projected out sort of the housing need over the next 10 years, and based on population trends and analysis from this region on sort of population projections, and based on trends in terms of tenure rates and typologies, we've found that the region over the next 10 years is going to need an additional 16,400 housing units to keep up with demand and population and employment growth. Now, while it may be possible to deliver 16,000 plus new housing units at sort of the existing levels of production, the cost of these new homes is going to be out of reach for most residents. So what we found is that new construction single-family home is sold at approximately $425,000 in the region. Less than 25% of your renters and less than 50% of your sort of overall residential population could afford to buy an average priced home of $275,000. Now, when you add in sort of new construction, there are going to be a lot fewer residents and households that can afford that new construction. So we need to start to get creative on how we meet this new housing demand that's more than just market rate single family homeowner production that we've sort of seen historically. One thing that is really great about your community is that, and region, is that over the last 10 years, you've already begun to really diversify the kind of housing stock that is being developed and produced regionally. So what you can see here with the chart on the right is that we've seen an uptick in multifamily development, as well as a modest uptick in sort of 2 to 9 unit products, and sort of mid-size multifamily development, which when compared to sort of your existing housing stock, you're starting to add sort of more diversity beyond just single family product. In terms of our sort of the affordable rental options, I think we've mostly talked through this piece around cost burden. And let me just pause for 1 second to sort of define what I mean by cost burden. So the way that we define cost burden is if your household is paying more than 30% of your income on housing costs. An extreme house cost burden or severely cost burden is more than 50% of your household's income on housing. So the dark blue on this chart is 30% of your household income and or above 30%, and the lighter blue is households that are paying more than 50% of their income. So what you see is very significant levels of households that are earning less than $35,000 a year that are cost burdened by housing. We also see that over half of your senior households are cost burdened, and over half of your single parent households are cost burdened by housing. Just to dive a little bit more into the senior housing piece of this, there's going to be significant and growing demand for senior housing in the region. The cohorts over the age of 50 are the fastest growing cohorts in the region, and most of these households are going to be cost burdened, are cost burdened today, and will continue to be cost burdened. As we sort of zoom into Fargo, both owners and renters in the city of Fargo are still facing challenging housing conditions. So, for example, to purchase a median-priced home in 2022, a resident had to earn over $80,000, and this is in part due to an increase in housing costs in Fargo. Coming out of the pandemic, really everywhere we're seeing a very significant increase in housing prices. And you are seeing similar trends around sort of cost burden by sort of various breakdowns. So approximately 40% of your total renter population is cost burdened. 64% of your seniors are cost burdened. Almost 60% of your single parent households are cost burdened. And interestingly, 40% or 43% of your households with children are cost burdened. Most subsidized affordable units in the region are a result of LIHTC or low-income housing tax credits, and or they're receiving federal funding sources. On a typical affordable housing development or project, multiple sources of federal and state funding is usually required to sort of develop that project. So this map here is showing where a lot of these subsidized affordable developments are located within the region broadly, and the vast majority of them are in the city of Fargo. So getting back to meeting that 16,000 household number for the region as a whole, a continued development model that prioritizes single-family detached housing is going to produce significantly fewer total units with significant new infrastructure costs. I'm not suggesting that there should not be any more single-family housing development. Single-family housing development is very important for the region and for your community. But what I am suggesting is that there is a need to think about the diversity of housing typologies and continue to invest in and support 2 to 10 unit development, sort of that physically missing middle typology, low-rise apartments and mid-rise apartments as well. Over the past decade, the bulk of new family development has occurred within downtown Fargo and downtown Moorhead and along Veterans Boulevard. So this map on the right is showing where your permitted multifamily developments have taken place over the last 10 years. In terms of housing starts, this map on the left shows that the vast majority of new housing starts in terms of defined as single family, twin homes, townhomes, and duplexes, the vast majority have been in the city of Fargo, with a significant amount in West Fargo as well. And this map on the right shows that the vast majority of multifamily development has also been taking place in the city of Fargo. So I went through a lot of data very, very quickly. And as Nicole said, there's a very long report that sort of underlies all of this, including more Fargo-specific data. But I think the big piece of what we're hoping to talk about today is, what do we do with this information? And what do you all as a city within this region, how do you think about sort of the housing needs and how to address them? Where do we go from here? So I'm going to talk through just at a high level a few sort of strategies that you might start to think about, and some of which you are already moving forward with or have moved forward with. So sort of to frame up this conversation about what do we do next as a city within this broader regional context. In terms of near-term solutions and the way that we might try to think about things that you can move quickly on, you might be able to think about hotel and office conversions, particularly coming out of the pandemic, where there's nationally, we're seeing high rates of commercial vacancies and a hotel market that is only starting to slowly come back. We did not do a hotel market analysis, so I can't speak to the occupancy rates in Fargo, but sort of nationally speaking, there tends to be a little bit more elasticity in the hotel market post-pandemic. And there may be an opportunity to work with your employers to, one, disseminate information about existing home ownership programs to employees, and also really help them work with them about sort of potentially thinking about sort of employer-assisted housing programs in the near term. But let's spend sort of the most time on these sort of longer-term strategies. These are strategies that are going to take a little bit more time to implement and will also take a little bit more time to actually sort of see the impacts of these strategies. But at the end of the day, these are the kinds of things that you as a city could be doing to really have the greatest effect or impact on meeting housing needs within your city and within the region as a whole. So we bucket these into 3 main categories: land use policies, funding strategies, and sort of thinking about the groundwork for broader future growth in your region. And this chart is broken out by what we think that cities within your region can be doing and what the region as a whole could be working on to address or implement some of these strategies. So let's talk about land use first. So you as a city and you as commissioners are intimately familiar with your toolkit is really around land use policies. And this is sort of your area where you can really affect change with housing need. So allowing housing supply to grow to match demand is the foundation of creating affordability in a housing market. Without sufficient and diverse housing supply, all other housing tools are a lot less effective and a lot more costly. So there are direct tools that you can use, like expedited review for affordable housing projects, or exploring policies that are like inclusionary zoning, though I know that's complicated in North Dakota. Indirect tools that sort of fall within this category could be things like as of right zoning for multifamily buildings, or allowing for ADUs throughout your city. In terms of sort of the specific strategies that we talk about in this report, and there's more detail in the sort of the longer report about what each of these mean. We talk about allowing for and reducing the barriers for soft density, so that product type that's 2 to 9 units, so things from townhomes up to very, very small multifamily buildings. Allowing for and incentivizing and supporting the construction of ADUs, accessory dwelling units. Supporting and reducing barriers for multifamily from a approvals process and zoning perspective, and prioritizing transit-oriented development. So allowing for more density at those transit nodes. Just to sort of highlight one of these recommendations, what we mean by this missing middle housing or the soft density are this product type that sits in the middle here, these townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, quads. In general, it's a denser product. It, depending on the market, can be cheaper to deliver than other product types. And they can also then be sold or rented at a lower price point, sort of to meet, in a non-subsidized way, affordable housing need. The other tools that cities use for supporting housing need is funding. So when we talk about funding for housing, there is a range of what we mean by affordable and what that can look like in a community. So at one end, affordable housing can be naturally occurring affordable housing. What that means is that the housing that you have in your market today is affordable to those who are earning your median income or slightly below your median income, and there's no intervention needed for that. Your housing is just naturally affordable. In between there, we have public housing, we have LIHTC projects, which restrict the incomes that households can have to live in those housing products, and to get that development to be built, it's usually in a particular funding stack that receives some form of subsidy. And then on the sort of high end of government funding for this kind of housing is permanent supportive housing. So it's a spectrum of how much funding or gap financing is required for these different kinds of housing types. But in general, when the value of affordable rents does not exceed development costs, developers need to rely on subsidies to make development feasible. And this is particularly true when we're talking about housing that's affordable for those who are low and very low income housing or households, such as seniors and single parents. So going back to the data that we were just talking about who in your community needs housing and who is cost burdened today, this is sort of the direct sort of solution and sort of counterpoint to the, or not counterpoint, but sort of the follow-up to that you have households that are at very low incomes that we see in most other markets. The way that you address this housing need is through a whole lot of tools, but one of which is a funding gap. So the way that we look at sort of development costs broadly is this column on the left are your sort of broad strokes around, from a developer perspective, what it costs to develop housing. And this column on the right are the expected revenue that a developer would get from that housing. If they have affordable units, so income restricted housing, there may be a development gap. So that sort of gray bar that you see, or that difference between the top of the blue bar and the top of the orange bar. And the way that you can try to get those two to, you being a public sector entity, can get those two to meet and help a developer deliver a product type that is not going to be met by the market, is through a whole lot of different kinds of funding sources. Sometimes that looks like discounted land. So you as a public entity have land that you own that you could provide to a developer at a discount or for free, and that helps to reduce their development costs. And there are many others which we can talk about later, and also in the next session that Nicole was talking about. I'm not going to go through this whole list, but we've begun to suggest some ways to think about where and how to deploy funding at a regional perspective, and also how you might start to think about sort of accruing funds to support housing. So a couple that I want to highlight here is, one is market existing land to transfer to developers in exchange for affordable housing development. So again, getting back at that development gap, offering up land at a discount to a developer who is going to produce the kind of housing that you want to see in your community can help to fill the gap and help to create the kind of housing that your community wants and needs. You might also consider dedicating or creating a fund to provide gap financing to acquire naturally occurring affordable housing in your community that can help to preserve long-term affordability. So what this, and there are examples from across the country, around the country, but we've highlighted one in our longer report that's located in the Twin Cities. And the core of this is that with LIHTC subsidies, they have a time limit for how much the subsidy or for how long the subsidy lasts on a development. And when that cliff happens, a developer may then, or the product owner may choose to sell the housing to a market rate developer who then reinvests in it and then converts those units into market rate. Or there may be an opportunity at that sort of tax credit cliff to, through a NOAA, preserve those affordable units that you already have in your community permanently. I think I went through a lot of information very quickly, but where we're going to head now is into a discussion with you all, the commissioners and City Commission and Planning Commission, around how we take this information and think about strategies for meeting housing needs in the city of Fargo. So I've highlighted a few examples. This is sort of a summary version of this, which I'm happy to keep up. But I think we're going to go into a discussion first, and then I can flip back and forth. Before we go into the discussion, are there any questions?
I'm passing around the executive summary too, and some cheat sheet notes in there from the slideshow.
I'm just curious if in our data collection, we're gathering models of what other cities and jurisdictions are doing, so we're not always reinventing the wheel, because you hear all kinds of examples, but I'm not seeing that necessarily bubble up locally as viable options or considerations necessarily.
So in our longer report for each of the examples of potential strategies that we suggest, we have an example of where it's being done elsewhere. So you can sort of see that model. And if you want to dive into more of sort of the policy nuance of it and its impact, that we've given you sort of some examples. But all of the strategies we've suggested have precedents from around the country, and many of which are not just sort of broadly across the country, but some are more focused really in this upper Midwest region.
So maybe we can also explain a little bit on, I don't know, Erin, if you want to talk a little bit about your company's background and your background specifically.
Sure, I guess I just sort of launched into the data. So my company and myself, so HRNA Advisors, we are a public policy consulting firm. We focus on real estate and economic development. And we do housing strategies, housing needs analysis, housing policy analyses across the country for regions and municipalities like yourselves, thinking about, one, what is the housing need in communities? And two, how do we solve for the challenges around housing that communities are facing? Those strategies, we work both on the public sector side and the private sector side. They require public-private partnerships to meet housing demand and housing need. So when we're working across the country, we're bringing both the sort of private market perspective to our recommendations, as well as best practices from other regions, municipalities, and states for housing development.
Jennifer Holtz. I'm curious about strategies to get some buy-in from developers to form more of these public-private partnerships. Are there any tips or ideas you can share that have been effective in other communities?
I think, yes. We had the opportunity to have a conversation with the Chamber of Commerce, a panel hosted by Rocky a few months ago, where the panel discussion, I was one of the panelists, and then the other panelists were from sort of the private market perspective. And we had I think a fun discussion around how we meet sort of the developer perspective and the sort of public policy goals perspective. I don't think there's a single sort of silver bullet solution to creating public-private partnerships, but at its core, it's about understanding what the market can and will deliver on its own and what it won't deliver and why. And I think our report starts to get at some of those fundamentals, but at a sort of a regional perspective. And I think sort of the next step I would recommend is more conversations like we had in July with the private sector, private development community, just to sort of get a better sense of why they aren't delivering certain product types and what could a regional strategy be around getting those product types delivered. And we talk about a little bit some of those strategies as well within the report.
Aaron, just following up on that, I think one of the interesting things about the study is it basically says we need more housing of all types, some maybe more than others, which I imagine isn't that, maybe it's unique, but maybe it's not. But what it tells me is that the market's going to go out and build where it's, either easiest or most profitable because we need it all, right? So it's not like they're building things we don't need. We need it across the board. So we need to, as a city, I think we need to look at this and figure out how do we incentivize or make it easier for those markets to get to that. We have planned unit developments and things like that that create flexible situations. If there was something specific to whatever missing middle area we were trying to do and come up with a strategy for that, just to give them some sort of bonus, because right now, why would you build if it's not as profitable as the other area when the market needs it all?
So one of the things I was struck by your study is 13,000. And I'm under the impression that over the last 10 years, we've done 17,000. So private market or whatever we've been doing, we can do the 13,000. We did 17. I think Commissioner Strand's kind of asking somebody, we could get in these arguments of what can the feds do? And Minnesota has different programs, but in North Dakota, what can the feds do? What can the state do to help us? What can we locally do to help us? Yeah. I think one of your premises is a national group should come in and help us as well on private partnerships. In this community, we do public-private partnerships fairly well, and I agree the middle area is kind of where we've identified, I think, many of the meetings we've gone to, that we've realized that that's kind of the market we should look at. And to Rocky's point, maybe it's not profitable, that's why we don't see it. So I guess I'm looking for, can your firm eventually give us tools, say, here's where you might look to fix or whatever. I think in our core neighborhood for Nicole, we had some money set aside, and would we incentivize the middle market? Would we give subsidies or grants, or what would we do? So my curiosity is, in your toolbox, I'm assuming you will have some recommendations for us to use?
Yep, that's right. So in terms of supporting missing middle, I think the key is for sort of understanding why you don't see a lot of missing middle happening in this market. It could be exactly as Rocky's describing this, that there are other development typologies that are much more profitable to move forward with. And so you don't have a development community that's particularly eager to develop this product type. It could be that you have a development community that doesn't have a lot of expertise or experience in developing this particular product type, because it is a different kind of product and it has different building code requirements, and the financing for it is going to look different too. On the lending side, one of the challenges could be that because you don't have this product, that much of this product type being delivered in the region, that lenders may be a little bit more weary to lend to these kinds of projects because they're a little riskier, they're untested, they're not as proven as your single family housing development. We heard through conversations from developers that rising interest rates, rising construction costs are constraining all kinds of development typologies, but that may then start to squeeze out and make missing middle more challenging because of all these other things that I just mentioned. And I'm sure I'm missing about 10 other things that might be making it challenging. But I think the first part is sort of understanding why your development community isn't delivering this, and then starting to get at what the solution could be. It could be as simple as a zoning change and making the approvals process easier, which is what we've suggested in the land use side. I want to sort of also go back to the top here. We wanted to make sure in our report that we weren't just suggesting pour a ton of money into housing as the only solution, that you have to have a whole sort of host of solutions that are both financial and non-financial to get the housing that you want built. So the big piece in our report that we're recommending around the missing middle is really a focus on land use and making sure that it is not, from a policy and approvals process, challenging to get this approved from for a developer. So making sure that your zoning is allowing for it and making sure that developers know how to navigate the building code.
Erin, if I could ask a question. So as we think about priorities, that was one of the questions, and this is a broader question, probably. I don't know if you have the ability to answer it or not, but we have certainly watched, and this is specific to the city of Fargo, not the region. We have watched our home ownership rates dropping. Is that, number one, is it an issue that we should be concerned about? And if so, should that be kind of the top of our priority list?
I think many or most communities nationally right now are seeing reductions in home ownership rates. So at the national level, we have a slide in here that shows that the national rate of home ownership went from like something like 67% down to like 64% in the last decade. And your region did the same thing, and your city has also done that. In Fargo, that could be driven by sort of a couple of things. It could be, and I apologize, we have this data in the report, but I don't have it top of mind right now on what the Fargo trends are on this. But the drivers of that reduction is the increasing cost of home ownership. And so you have people not being able to afford, not being able to buy a home, not being able to afford their home. The other sort of challenges with this relate to, let me start over. One thing that could be driving that change is the increase in your multifamily rental stock in your home or in your city. That's not a problem. That's not an issue. That just on a pure numbers basis, we saw I think something like over 3,000 units delivered in the last 10 years. That's a good thing that Fargo is seeing multifamily rental development, and so that could affect your home ownership rates. That you may have not actually lost that many homeowners, you just have that many more renters. So in my mind, that's not a problem. Where you may see sort of other issues is what we're hearing nationally is around issues around investor owners that are coming in and buying single family homes and then renting them out, so converting. And it's hard for your average household to compete with that purchase price of a home. That is a challenge. And that's where, for some communities, that's where you're seeing sort of that conversion from home ownership to rental stock. So I'm sort of rambling right now, and I think there are a whole other sort of set of reasons why you're seeing a decline here and nationally. Whether that needs to be your highest priority, I think I'd need to look back at the data and just sort of see one more time on to me, where I would start is on cost burden rates. Those households in your community that are very cost burdened, are they homeowners? Are they renters? Without having the numbers right in front of me right now, I'm 95% certain that you have a very significant renter population that is very cost burdened. And we also learned from our survey that we've got 90% of renters wanting to become homeowners. So in my mind, if I were you all, I would be thinking about How do we make rental products more affordable to our cost burden renters? And how do we create more home ownership opportunities for those who want to stay in their homes and who are renters who want to buy homes?
A question? Thank you. So for me, it's got to start when we think strategically and how we're going to determine these priorities with a solid regional task force creation and having the right people at the table for that conversation, including, in my opinion, the land trust. So can you speak to, with clear scope and goals and objectives identified, that that's part of their work? Where are we on setting up the regional task force? That's probably a question for Nicole.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, I think both Adam and I can talk through a little bit of next steps from what we're seeing. From a local level, City of Fargo level, next steps include how do we roll this into our growth plan? So you're already seeing some of that, and then, which is why we took the study on in the first place. And then, Adam, if you want to talk about your latest developments on the regional housing.
Sure, be happy to. Again, my name is Adam Altenberg. I'm with the Fargo-Moorhead Metropolitan Council of Governments. We're a regional transportation and planning agency that works with jurisdictions across Cass and Clay counties. This report was approved back in September 21st. And one of the recommendations that Aaron highlighted was the creation of this regional housing committee. A committee that could deal with housing policies, investments, other strategies to meet the region's housing needs. With MetroCog, this would be in step with some of our other cross jurisdictional committees that work on transportation and regional planning issues. This would also tie into new federal regulations with a bipartisan infrastructure law that requires organizations like us to better coordinate on housing issues. So with that all said, MetroCog did put together a draft joint powers agreement back in October. And on October 25th, we did meet with area planners from the 5 metro area cities as well as Cass and Clay counties just to talk about this joint powers agreement, some of the roles, responsibilities, and such. And from that meeting, I think what we got out of that is that this committee would be key for education, communication, coordination that came out from the study, and also tracking and evaluation of regional housing metrics. So for example, summary of market conditions, housing issues, and other housing needs to see if we're on track to meet that 16,400 units by 2032. But we've also discussed that as this committee matures, that we could also start to look at what Aaron touched on, guidance for new land use tools for different jurisdictions in the area, and then potentially overseeing new funding and investment programs. So with that, this draft joint powers agreement, it's being discussed with cities and counties right now. It's our thought that once the jurisdictions are comfortable with some of the language, that we'd probably be reaching out to some of the other stakeholders that were involved in the study. This would include the Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Fargo, Moorhead, EDC, Home Builders Association, and then FM Area Association of Realtors. We'd also like to meet with other stakeholders that were involved in the study as well. And this would include affordable housing organizations, state housing finance agencies, and then some of our local agencies such as Beyond Shelter, Habitat for Humanity, Lake Agency Regional Council, and the Cass Clay Community Land Trust. So we'll be having a lot of discussions here in the coming weeks with regard to this creation of this committee. But once we have these discussions, it's our hope that we'll have this joint powers agreement that will be signed by the cities and counties probably in early 2024. So that's where we're at with that.
Thanks, Adam. Commissioner Strand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious, is it Aaron, is that your name? Okay, I'm curious what the data points are. A couple moments or opportunities I see out there, and I don't know the data for. We all know there's a whole sea of senior citizens who are cost burdened, who can't afford to stay in their houses sometimes and can't afford to leave them. They can't, with the interest rates and the economic dynamics and the lack of options, that we have a whole category of homes that ordinarily I would guess would be ripe for transitioning to new owners, to families with kids in the local neighborhoods. I'd be curious about that data, what exists and what it tells us. and what opportunities we can provide those folks to shift out of their homes into an appropriate setting for aging out. I'm also curious about the Roosevelt neighborhood, and where we have all this shifting college housing. I've heard as much as 77% of the single-family homes in the Roosevelt neighborhood are rentals. And yet some of them are empty, blighted out, blighting, and I'd be wondering about what that dynamic looks like and how we accelerate, because we've also had, we have a lowering college population and we have an escalating number of accessible apartments within reach of the campuses. So I want to know more about that dynamic, what we can do, what it looks like right now, how we can get those homes back into the market, if possible, as single-family homes, and what types of actions that would take on our behalf too. Just two examples.
Yeah, let me start with the first one. So around seniors that are housing burdened, I think you brought up a really good point around, and we see this nationally, if there aren't good options for where seniors can move to, they stay in their homes a lot longer, and it's really hard to get the housing product cycle down to your first-time home buyers or those families that are growing. And having your seniors stay in their single-family homes is a really big challenge for them too, oftentimes with stairs and accessibility issues and supportive services. So you're exactly right. This is a challenge, and it's a really important challenge to think about. I think at its core, this is about making sure that there are options for seniors to move into. And what that usually looks like is various types of senior housing. So it could be market rate multifamily, where they are units that are accessible, they're on a single floor, and they don't have age or income restrictions. You also can see sort of income restricted senior housing and just senior housing where it's age restricted, but it's still market rate or luxury. And then senior products where you have sort of transition homes where you can move in and it's a market rate sort of unit, it's income restricted, but there are places for you to move to as you age and need more assistance. So these are all things that your community would benefit from to get those seniors out of those single family homes and into other products that are beneficial both for them individually, but also beneficial to the housing market broadly. So then your other question around the neighborhood that has rental units that have historically served college students that are, as you said, blighted. I would want to know a little bit more information about the data underlying that and what's driving this. But some questions that I have are, is that product type, has it been really replaced by newer and sort of better options, candidly, that these college students want to live in? So is there not a demand for this kind of housing product by this market within this particular neighborhood? Are these housing units not being kept up to code? And is this a code enforcement sort of challenge? I don't think this is the case, but is there an appraisal gap challenge where the amount of money that it would be required to rehab and renovate the home would then exceed the market value of that home, or the sort of the flipping rate effectively? And if that is the case, there are programs that you can look to that cities offer, basically rehab loans, so low-cost rehab loans or grants for individual property owners. So this wouldn't be used by an investor owner, but it would be used by a household owner that's going to occupy that unit. So that helps get back to sort of Arlette's point around encouraging home ownership and investment in your existing stock.
And I think the answer is yes to all the above. And the Core Neighborhoods Plan addresses a lot of that. And again, the growth plan is going to get into the specifics of that as well. But I would say, plus we have aging landlords who are also, kind of looking at that next generation of investor. And so it's a lot of dynamic factors. I'm sure there's more questions as we continue on. We have this room until 1. I know some people have a hard stop sometime now between 12:30 and 1, and I know I'm just going to pass it. We can keep going too, yeah.
Yeah, I think, these are good discussions, and I was just we could probably take a few more questions as long as people keep having them. And I just wanted to follow up. Yeah, I think Nicole said it right. Yes to all those. I think we had a peak in college attendance that drove investors to buy up every house around the campus, and it turned into a pretty good investment. But multifamily developers caught up and attendance went down. But all those homes are now still rental housing, and so I guess my question would be, are there other communities that have come up with strategies to incentivize sort of flipping them back into home ownership? And I don't know if that's a possible where you can require it to be owner occupied at the end of an incentive, but I think that's something that would be a good consideration for us in some of those areas.
I think the low-hanging fruit that you see in most communities is around rehab programs, so grants and loans for homeowners that want to reinvest in the housing that they own. So again, it's homeowners that are eligible, not developers or investors.
But how do you, we have a rehab program. How do you get them to take, I get for if you already own a home and you want to remodel it or keep it up, that's one thing. But how do you convince somebody, even a developer, to come in and buy that home and then sell it as a owner occupied?
I think some are doing it. There's a few, I don't know what they call themselves, but the North Side guys that are starting to do that. Part of it is market demand, right, and all that. But again, I think it's to all the above. And one of the points I was going to make is if you look to the recommendations slide where, when I count on here, 12 to 15, 18 activities that could take a lot of staff resources and coordination. And right now, I don't want to say we don't have anyone, but I would say in our community and or in the city staffing, is there any really one, I come at it from a project management perspective, there's no really one entity that's leading these efforts. Obviously, the Land Trust is leading their own effort, but in terms of the other ones, and we heard a little bit from last week's YWCA functions, and so it's really, it's like chasing balls, and there's a lot of balls in the air. And as staff, which is why we have that next session, is, really, as the planning department, we're really staffed to respond to market demand, and then we're really staffed to manage the federal funding, because it takes almost 5 full-time staff members to manage the federal funding. And as we will know, that federal funding, it's $1.2 million a year. That's it. And so it's not a lot of money going out. And as these guys, our funders can tell, our partners can tell you, that's just like a small percentage into what's going on into their mix. So I just want to leave to, there's a lot of ideas out there. One of the things I wanted Aaron to speak to, one of the things that excites me about when Aaron speaks is what's unique about Fargo. And I know there's some things about Fargo that excite you, and not to put you on the spot, but sometimes when you hear her kind of talk data and get really excited, it's kind of fun to hear about what is unique to Fargo a little bit. So I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, Aaron, but I know there's things that excite you about our community.
For just a moment, could I ask a question? You said that there are public programs for incentives for homeowners to get a loan and do improvements to their home and then pay that back, correct? Isn't that what we have here? What's the name of that program?
The NRI program?
No, we don't have those in Fargo. So we have the NRI program, and the Gate City program, but that's the only program we have right now.
Okay. Well, I guess one of the things that comes to mind for me is that it's not available to landowners who own rental property. There are a lot of small dealers in Fargo that may own 5 or 6 rental properties, and they run around and try to take care of them as best they can. But of course, if their rents don't promote that kind of activity, then those properties run down. So I was thinking, and I've thought about this for a long time, I think there should be incentives for homeowners like that, or apartment owners. I talk to them quite often for some reason. I'll meet them here and there, and they're always complaining about, the inspections that are coming up and that they wish they had more money to put into their places, but they don't. And part of that is because we don't have a program that is able to help them out. Have you heard anything about this, Rocky? Yeah, I think it's, sometimes the rental owners get discouraged with trying to keep up with all their properties. And then it makes them more difficult to sell too, as they start to run down. And of course, we know what, the bad landlords do. They do it on purpose. But I think there are a lot of them that don't do it on purpose. And if they, with some incentives, they would step forward.
So Nicole, as we're getting close to the end, I think what you were asking our group is, you have limited capacity to do more than your day-to-day work. And so you're trying to figure out where do you want, as the planning department, to kind of focus those efforts of these strategies? Or that, I guess one of the questions I had was, a lot of this goes into the land development code process that's next, right? And so as you develop the RFP for that next step after the growth plan, do you put a focus on this? So that's what you're looking for, somebody that can do the land development code that also has the ability to offer, to incorporate these into a new LDC, or how does that process
Well,
intervene?
and I think it's a little bit like what Commissioner Kolpak was, that there's that regional momentum of beyond what's in the powers of elected officials and staff members, right? There's that regional EDC kind of chamber, HBA, and, and them not being here doesn't mean we're not working with them. It's just more about, what are we going to own as city leaders, and what is like a regional kind of motivation, and what is that market space, and and there's balance between all that, and where we see our expertise and specialization being is in getting that population that can't speak for themselves and that can't that we're working with, that below 80% AMI, honestly, and that's what the federal funding is going for. These are all kind of really important initiatives, though, and they require, just like other initiatives, a grounding swell of initiative and outreach and organizing, which the Regional Housing Commission will help us get there. So it's all going to, I think the bottom line is, all it's going to take time, and there's no magic bullet. There's no silver bullet for it all. And one of my takeaways from the study, it was really helpful to do the study, and one of my takeaways was it's really about saying yes to everything, and we need all of everything. And so it's not about this or that, it's about we need everything, and just to keep up. And so that was the main point.
Can I put Aaron on the spot for a minute? Because, your firm obviously does more than just what you did here. I guess if we were to hire a consultant to help the planning department do the next step, to take the next level of detail, what does that look like from, if you want to give us the 30-second sales pitch on what you would sell next, or where we should, but that's why we're here, to figure out how do we take the next steps.
I think that the next step for you all is prioritization, that, as Nicole was saying, with limited staff capacity, both within the city, but also at the regional level. We saw this throughout the study, that everyone's doing as much as they can right now, but there's just technical sort of assistance and just sort of understanding the sort of whole slew of potential programs. Capacity is a big challenge. It's sort of public sector, private sector, nonprofit spheres. And so because of that, it's about prioritization. So taking all of those needs and saying, these are the areas of greatest need, which we say in this study, and then therefore these are our priorities from sort of a political perspective, and here's how we're going to get there. This starts to lay out, broadly speaking, the broad strokes of what you could do, but we haven't done that work around how you all sort of start to work together at the city level and the regional level to say, okay, these are the three things that we're going to do. These are the things that don't cost us money, but they take capacity, and this is how we're going to how we're going to deploy limited funds, this is the area, it's targeted area of greatest need, or 3 targeted areas of greatest need. And then the last, I feel like I've been sort of Debbie Downer throughout this whole sort of conversation about here are the challenges. But going back to Nicole's question about what makes Fargo great, what makes this region great, I just want to sort of try to end on a really high note, which is that what the top of the message was is that you all are seeing astronomical amounts of employment growth and population growth. And that is really, really impressive at a national level, at a sort of upper Midwest level. The amount of growth that you guys have seen in the last few decades is incredible. And you are projected to sustain those growth levels. That is really incredible. The other thing that's really incredible about you, the city of Fargo, is the amount of housing that you have delivered over the last 10 years. Those maps really do show just how much housing you have been delivering to keep up with this growth. And so the takeaway is really that if you want, as a region, to sustain this very high and significant employment and population growth, it's going to have to be met with housing of all different types. And so, as Nicole was saying yes to all the kinds of housing that come your way. And then being targeted, so going back to your question, Rocky, about being very targeted about the things that aren't being delivered in the market today. Why aren't they being delivered, and sort of prioritizing your funds towards those particular areas of greatest need?
Thank you. Any other questions or closing comments from anybody that didn't get a chance? Michael, you've taken a lot of notes. What's your highlights as you lead us into the future?
First, I want to thank all of our planning commissioners for getting together with us today, and also our outside partners as well who have joined us in the front row today. I think there's a lot of good takeaways, and just a couple of comments. And thank you, Aaron, for that last kind of outro about strengths and possibilities in Fargo. I think that this is an opportunity for us to catalyze a conversation in the community. This is a conversation that's larger than Fargo. It is a Metro conversation. Thank you, Adam, for being here to talk about some of the MetroCog contribution to this, because I do think there are some key takeaways here. If you were to try to distill this down to kind of 4 or 5 essential elements of things that we could probably start having some regional conversation around, I think we can do that. But first and foremost, really starting with that capacity analysis of what we can deliver as staff and staff alone. This is, you've got, behind all of this, and behind all of this are decades and decades of practice and expertise and experience. We can absolutely go in different directions too, but I think we're going to be really intentional and make sure that we're resourced appropriately. So I just want to thank everybody for their time today. This is a really good conversation. Very good, good thoughts, good comments.
Thank you, everybody. And we do have a part 2 of this that starts at, does it start at 1? Is that at
Yeah,
1
1
up in
o'clock at
the
the Sky Commons or the old chambers, if anyone's invited. And we'll have our panelists from Beyond Shelter, Habitat, Housing Authority, and the Land Trust.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.